Здравствуйте.
Hello,
Я приветствую участников
I
конференции.
greet the conference
Сегодня тема моего вебинара–
today. The
это
topic of my webinar
ускорение
is
управления с
the
числовыми рядами
acceleration of control with
применением
numerical
прибора
series
развития
by using
концентрации
the
вечной
device for the
жизни
development of the
PRK-1U.
concentration of eternal
В этой
life
теме я
PRK-1U. In this topic, I
показываю
show
структуру
the
управления,
structure of
которые
control, which is
применяются
applied as
в
a whole
целом для
to
ускорения,
accelerate,
вообще
generally
говоря,
speaking,
развития
the
информации,
development of
необходимой
information
в
necessary
мире
in
для
the
обеспечения
world to
вечной жизни
ensure
всем.
eternal life
И,
for all. And
соответственно,
accordingly, I
уточняю
precise
и
and
технологически
technologically extend
распространяю
this general
эту
control
общую
system
систему управления
in order
на
to speed
то,
up the
чтобы
control
ускорить
with
управление
number
числовыми рядами
series by application
посредством применения
of
PRK-1U. И
PRK-1U.
здесь, прежде всего,
And here,
нужно
first of
обратить
all, you
внимание на
need to pay
следующее,
attention to the
что
following:
когда Бог,
that
Создатель
when God, the
всего мира,
creator of the whole world,
создавал
created such a
такую реальность,
reality
чтобы
so that
каждый
each
элемент
element of
информации
information
развивался в
develops into the
будущее,
future,
то
this
в этой
control system
системе
is
управления
considered, first of
рассматривается
all,
прежде всего с
from
точки
the
зрения
point of view
Бога,
of God,
каким образом нужно
how to
так
develop
развивать
the next
следующий элемент
element of
информации,
information
чтобы
so that
этот
this level of
уровень
control
управления произвел
realizes
вечность для всех,
eternity for
вечную жизнь
all,
для всех в том
eternal
числе.
life for all as well.
И таким
And
образом
thus,
при
when
рассмотрении
considering this
этого
issue,
вопроса нужно
one must
сначала
first
рассматривать,
consider,
вообще говоря, как
generally
развивается
speaking, how
информация,
information
которая
that spreads to any structure, to
распространяется
any events of
в
eternal life
любую
develops,
структуру, в любые события вечной жизни, и при
and at the
этом
same
эта
time,
информация
this
еще
information
имеет
still
элемент
has an
роста
element of
одновременно,
growth
именно в направлении
simultaneously and
обеспечения
a
вечной жизни для
direction
всех.
that is ensuring eternal
Тогда
life for
нужно
everyone.
рассмотреть,
Then it is
собственно, как
necessary to consider, in
реализовывал
fact, how
управление
God
сам Бог,
Himself realized
и
control,
рассмотреть
and to consider the
структуру
structure
построения
of the
ткани Бога
construction of the
в
tissue of God
взаимосвязи со
in
всей
connection
внешней
with the
вечной
entire
реальностью.
external
И
eternal
здесь
reality. And here
видно,
it can be
что
seen that when
когда
God
Бог реализовывал
implemented His
собственную
own
физическую
physical
материю
matter
в виде физического
to be
тела
eternal in the
вечной,
form of
то
physical body,
вся внешняя
all external
информация,
information,
которая в виде
which
сигналов
was also received in
также
the form of
поступала на
signals
его
on
физическое
his
тело,
physical body,
она
was
была
exactly
именно
eternal.
вечной. То есть задача в данном
That
случае
is, the task
выделить
in this case is to select such
такие элементы
elements
информации
of
окружающего
information
мира,
from the surrounding
чтобы
world so that the
поступающий
level of
от них
information
уровень
coming
информации,
from them,
спектр или
the
сигнал
spectrum or
информации,
signal of information,
все они
all of them
были
are
вечными.
eternal.
И
And
здесь,
here,
с точки
from
зрения
the point of view
конструирования
of
мира,
constructing
как
the
это делал
world,
Бог,
as God
стоит
did,
задача
the
следующая.
task is the
Во-первых,
following.
определить и такой источник,
First, to determine
который
such a source
соответствует
that
этим
meets
требованиям
these
информации
information
или же приближен к
requirements
нему.
or is
Если
close to it.
он, например,
If, for
приближен,
example, it is
соответственно,
approximated,
подкорректировать
accordingly it is
посредством
necessary to
различных методов
correct by means
управления.
of various methods
По
of
моему
control
учению можно
according to my teachings.
использовать
You can use
совершенно
completely
разные
different
методы
methods of
управления,
control.
так подкорректировать,
You should
чтобы
correct
источник
so that
обладал
the
свойствами
source has the
вечности.
properties of
И
eternity.
здесь,
And here,
во-первых,
firstly, it is
необходимо
necessary to
выделить
identify
эту
this control
область
area
управления, из
from
которой
which the
исходит
signal
сигнал,
originates.
и она,
And
как
it, as
правило,
a rule, is
обычно
usually
выявляется
revealed in the subject of
в предмете
activity,
деятельности, то,
that
чем
is, what a
занимается
person
человек,
does,
например.
for example.
И здесь
And
само
here, the very
выделение– это выделение
identification
элемента
is the selection
восприятия,
of an element of
обладающего
perception
этими
that has
функциями
these functions of transferring
перевода
information
информации
from
внешнего
the
мира
outside
в
world into a
структуру,
structure
когда
when this
эта
information
информация
has the
обладает
properties
свойствами
of
вечности, и
eternity,
уже перевода
and
на
then
физическую материю.
the transfer
И
into physical
здесь
matter.
уже применим
And here we
уровень
should apply the
управления,
level of
когда
control
прибор
when
развития
the
концентрации
device for
вечной
the
жизни
development of
PRK-1U
concentration of eternal life
используется с точки зрения
PRK-1U
именно
is being used from the point of
той
view
формулировки,
of
которая
the
и
wording
в
that is in the
функциях она, эта
functions.
формулировка
That is,
реализовывается,
this
которая
wording,
дана в названии
which is
прибора.
given in the name
То
of
есть
the device,
нужно
is
развить
being realized.
концентрации
That is, it
именно
is
вечной жизни,
necessary
и
to develop
вот
exactly
именно
concentration's
высокая
eternal life.
концентрация на задачи
And it is
обеспечения
precisely the high
вечной жизни всех,
concentration on
она
the task of ensuring eternal life
выделяет
for
эту
everyone,
область
allocates this
практически
area
как бы
almost automatically.
Самопроизвольно
By its
формируется
own, the
информация внешнего
information of the
мира,
external
что
world is formed
обратный
as if
вектор по отношению к
spontaneously,
концентрации, он
and
обладает
the
свойствами
inverse
вечности.
vector
Это когда
in relation
технологически
to
используется прибор,
concentration has
и
the
в данном
properties of
случае
eternity.
использование
This is when the
чисел
device is used
обуславливает
technologically. And in this case, the use of
именно
numbers determines the
конкретную
specific
структуру
structure
исполнения,
of
например,
use.
числовой ряд,
For
который
example, a
реализует
number
норму
series
здоровья или
that
норму
realizes
событий,
the health
он
norm
в
or
данном
the
случае
norm of
имеет совершенно
events
конкретные
has
характеристики
very
и
specific
конкретную цель.
characteristics and
И
a
вот
specific goal in this case.
выделение вот этой
And namely, for the
цели,
allocation of this
чтобы,
goal,
например,
in
не
order, for
обобщаться
example, not to
на
generalize
какие-то
to some little
малодифференцированные уровни,
unified
сначала
levels, you
можно
first need to
применять
apply
именно
precisely the
ускорение
acceleration of control with
управления с числовыми
numerical
рядами,
series,
где
where the device
сам
for the
прибор
development of the
разбития концентрации,
concentration of eternal life
конечный результат
PRK-1U
реализует
implements
именно
precisely
высокую
a high
концентрацию, где
concentration,
обратный вектор от
where the
концентрации
inverse
уже,
vector from
как я сейчас
concentration,
сказал,
as I just said, already
реализовывает именно
realizes
структуру
precisely the
вечности,
structure of
вечной жизни.
eternity,
Поэтому,
eternal life.
выделяя посредством, например,
Therefore, by
числового
identifying
ряда
a specific
конкретный
control level, a specific
уровень
task by
управления,
means of, for
конкретную
example,
задачу,
a numerical series,
можно
the control
использовать
by means of the device can be used
управление
as
посредством
follows.
прибора
Through perception,
следующим
that
образом.
element of perception, which
Посредством
consists of three
восприятия
lenses,
перемещается
moves, and sometimes a plate
в тот элемент
with
восприятия,
diamonds
который
can be
состоит из
added
трех лиц,
to the
или
area
можно добавлять иногда
where
пластину с
the
бриллиантами,
transition from external
в
reality
область, где
to
именно
the structure of
осуществляется
perception takes place,
переход с внешней реальности в структуру восприятия.
and where this
И вот там,
transition
где
takes
осуществляется
place,
этот переход,
it is necessary,
нужно,
first of all,
во-первых,
to
вывести
bring into perception
восприятие
the image of
образ
the small
маленького.
lens.
При
When choosing
выводе
this
этого
image,
образа
you will need to
можно
pay
будет
attention to the
обратить
fact
внимание, что
that the lens begins to connect
линза
with the device
начинает
by
в
a
определенном
certain
отрезке
segment of
света
light.
связываться с прибором.
And
И вот
if you
если
and you
дальше
first
обратить внимание на этот
and you
процесс
further
и
pay attention to
постараться
this
его в
process and
дальнейшем
try to
изучить,
study it further,
то
you will
можно
be able
будет
to see
увидеть, что,
that in fact
собственно,
these very
сами вот эти
fluctuations,
флуктуации,
certain
определенные импульсы
impulses of
связи
connection
между
between the
линзой
lens
и прибором,
and the
они
device are
осуществляются
carried out in such a way
таким образом,
that
что с верхней
first cover
поверхности линзы
the upper
элемент
surface
света,
of the
перемещаясь
device,
к прибору, охватывает сначала
and from the upper
верхнюю
surface of the
поверхность
lens,
прибора,
the element of
и вот
light
здесь
moves
возникает следующий такой
into
определенный
the
феноменальный
device.
уровень
And
восприятия,
here,
когда
the next, as it
перенесенная
were,
линза
a
в
certain
своем
phenomenal
воображении
level of perception
обладает теми же
arises
характеристиками
when the
практически,
transferred lens in
что
your
и
imagination
линза,
has the
которая
same
фактически физически
characteristics in
находится на
practice
приборе.
as the lens,
И
which is
как только
actually
мы
physically
этот
located on the
процесс
device.
понимаем совместными
And as soon as we
усилиями,
understand this
различным
process
уровнем
through
управления
joint
в коллективном
efforts,
сознании,
by a different level of
концентрации в коллективном
control in the
сознании, этих
collective
знаний,
consciousness,
то
by
получается,
concentration in the
что мысль
collective
работает
consciousness of this
идентично
knowledge,
элементу
it turns
физической
out that
среды.
thought
Тогда
works
становится
identically to
понятно,
an element of the
почему Бог
physical
мог создать
environment.
свое физическое
Then it
тело
becomes clear
такое
why
же, как у
God could
человека,
create his physical body,
благодаря
which is
только
the same as
системой
that of a
личного
person,
развития,
thanks
личной
only to the
концентрации.
system of
И
personal development of personal
в данном случае это
concentration.
понятно, образ
And in this
обладает
case,
теми
it
же
is
свойствами, то есть
understandable. The
достаточно
image has the same
составить образ, и он
properties.
реализуется.
That is, it
То
is
же
enough
самое
to compose an image,
соответствует
and
и
it
для
is
уровня
realized. The same is true
реализации
for the level of
учения,
realization of
когда
training, when by
духовным
spiritual
действием,
action,
действием
by the action
души,
of the
сознания,
soul, consciousness,
можно
one can
реализовать
realize
вечное
an
физическое тело.
eternal physical
И
body.
здесь
And
именно
here,
задача вот
it is
вечной
precisely the
реализации
task
в
of
этой
eternal
маленькой линзе,
realization in
которая
this small
мысленно
lens, which is
перемещена в
mentally
область
moved to the
перехода
area of
внешней
transition
информации
of external
в структуру
information
восприятия,
into the structure
можно
of
именно
perception.
сосредоточить
It is
названные
possible to
сейчас
concentrate the
элементы
elements of
управления,
controls,
методы, способы
methods, the
управления,
ways of controls that have been named
чтобы
now, in order
проинформировать
to
эту
inform this small
маленькую линзу,
lens,
образ
its
ее в
area,
области
in the area of
перехода
transition
в
to
структуру
the
восприятия
structure of
внешней реальности.
perception of
Таким
external
образом,
reality
что
in
она
such a
именно
way
реализует
that it
все
exactly
структуры вечной жизни,
realizes
которые
all
проходят
the
через нее.
structures of
То
eternal
есть
life
есть
that
некое
pass through
событие,
it.
любое событие мира, и
That is,
нужно
there is a
вокруг
certain event
этого события поставить линии,
any event in
лучше
the world, and it is
светящиеся
necessary to
белого
put
цвета,
lines
например,
around this event.
можно
The
иногда
lines
в отдаленных участках
should better be
серебристым
luminous,
оттенком.
white, for
И
example,
далее
in
эти
remote areas
области
with a silvery
начинают
tint.
объединяться и
And
как в
further, these
некую
areas begin to
корзину,
unite,
например,
and
вытянутый шар, так
as if
скажем, по
in a
форме
kind of basket, for example,
сужающийся
in
в
an
виде конуса,
elongated bowl, so to speak,
начинают
narrowing in the form of a cone.
сосредотачиваться
Precisely
именно те
those
события,
events begin to
излучение из
concentrate,
которых
the radiation
реализует
from
вечную
which
жизнь всем.
realizes eternal
Соответственно,
life for
так как
everyone.
излучение для всех вечно,
Accordingly,
то
since radiation is
тот, кто это
eternal for
делает
everyone,
и
the one who
воспринимает,
does and
он также
perceives it, he
получает
also
и свою
receives his
систему
system of
вечной
eternal
жизни в
life in
виде
the
света
form
вечной
of the
жизни
light of
и
eternal life,
реализует уже
and
дальше
realizes further
опосредованно через
indirectly
две
through the
большие
two
линзы,
large
которые нужно в этот
lenses,
момент быстро перенести
which
в
at
этот
this
же
moment must be
примерно
quickly
область
transferred
практически,
to this
где находится восприятие
approximately
маленькой
the
линзы.
same area,
И здесь
actually where the
следует обратить
perception of the
внимание,
small
что
lens is. And here
этот
it should be
процесс, он
noted that these
по сути
processes, in fact,
системный
are
процесс.
systemic
Почему,
processes.
например, именно
Why,
выделение
for
света
example,
строится
precisely the
по
separation
отношению к
of
себе
light
не
is not built
специально, а
specifically
именно с
in
обобщенной
relation to
для всех
yourself, but
равнозначной
with a
области
generalization
обеспечения вечной жизни
for all
всем.
equal areas of
Потому
ensuring
что
eternal life for
мы
everyone. Because
реализуем
we
вечную
realize
жизнь реально,
eternal
системно для
life in
всех
a really
и пользуемся
systematic way for
общими,
everyone and use
одинаковыми,
the
унифицированными
general,
для всех условиями
identical, unified
вечной жизни.
conditions of
И от
eternal
этого
life for
коллективное
all.
сознание
And due
становится
to
все более
this,
прочным
the collective
и
consciousness becomes
все
more
более
solid and more
концентрированным в плане
concentrated in
реализации всей
terms
вечной
of the
жизни, и
realization of all
тогда
eternal life.
решается
And then the
быстрее
question of ensuring
вопрос
eternal life
обеспечения
for all
вечной
is
жизни
resolved
всем
faster,
при
regardless of
любом
any
сочетании
combination of
событий.
events.
Поэтому здесь
Therefore, it
важно
is important here
выделять
to
не только
single out
конкретно
not only
свой
your
спектр,
specific
свою линию
spectrum, your
получения этого излучения,
line
но
of
по сути
receiving
в
this
том числе
radiation. In fact,
коллективного уровня
including the
мышления
collective level
по
of
обеспечению всей
thinking to
вечной жизни,
ensure eternal life
но
for all,
и
but
обязательно
also be sure
контролировать,
to
как
control
это
how it
распределяется
is
всем
distributed to
сразу.
everyone at once.
И причем
And in the
одинаково, то
same
есть
way,
все
that is,
должны
everyone
получать
should receive the
одинаковый
same
уровень
level of
вечной жизни
eternal
для
life
всех.
for all.
Есть при развитии учения,
During
когда
the
человек
development of the
осваивает глубоко
teachings, when a
учение, он
person
может, конечно,
masters deeply
самостоятельно
my
выделять область
teachings, he
локальную
can,
для
of course,
себя, вечную
independently
жизнь,
select
при
for
этом,
himself a local
естественно,
area to live
вкладывая
eternally,
структуру в
while
обеспечение
naturally
вечной жизни всем,
inserting the structure of
как
ensuring eternal
структуру
life for
именно
everyone
основную для
as a
коллективного
structure that
сознания,
is
и
fundamental
тогда его
for the
реализация
collective
происходит все
consciousness.
более
And
устойчиво
then his
на
implementation
какой-то
takes place more and more steadily in terms
плане
of
именно
some
большое
great distance
отдаление
in
в
the
будущем
future
по
in
времени,
time,
когда нужно
when it is
предпринимать
necessary to
меньше
take fewer
управляющих
control
действий
actions for the
для
systemic nature
системности
of
именно
the
процесса
process
вечной
of eternal
жизни
life
для
for
всех.
all.
Здесь важно
Here
иметь в
it
виду
is
следующее,
important to
что
keep in mind the
вечная
following,
жизнь должна
that
быть
eternal
обеспечена
life
всем
should be provided
независимо
to
от
everyone,
уровня развития или уровня
regardless of the
использования
level
каких-то
of
технологий.
development or the
То есть
level of
настолько
use of some
должно быть
technologies.
инсталлировано
That
сознание
is,
коллективное.
the collective
А при
consciousness
этом те, кто
should
занимается
be
долго этим направлением и
docked to
умеет
such extent.
реализовывать ее
And at
там
the same
конкретно для
time,
себя,
those
для
who have
какого-то
been
количества
engaged in this
окружающих, они
direction for a long
просто
time
в этом
and know
случае
how to
с
implement it
меньшим
specifically
количеством
for
идентификации
themselves
управляющих
for a
действий
certain
реализуют
number
то же
of
самое.
others,
Поэтому
they
это
in this
взаимно
case implement the same thing
необходимый
just with a
процесс как для
smaller
тех, кто
number
уже
of
очень
certain
глубоко продвинулся в
iterations and
управлении
controlling
по моему
actions.
учению по обеспечению всем
Therefore, this
вечной
is
жизни,
a
так и
mutually
для тех, кто
necessary
только
process
начинает
both for
это делать.
those
И
who
вот эта
have
точка
already
объединения
been deeply advanced
начинающего
in
действия
control according
по
to my teachings to
обеспечению
ensure
вечной жизни
eternal
всем,
life for
причем
all,
любыми
and for those
технологиями,
who are just
и
beginning to do this.
действия
And this is the
уже
point of unification of the
продвинутого
beginning
за счет
action to ensure eternal
изучения
life for
специальных
everyone.
технологий,
And with
они
my
часто очень
technologies and the
узкоспециализированы,
action already
они
advanced through the
обуславливают
study of special
с точки зрения вот
technologies,
этой
they
выделенной
are often
системы
very narrowly
управления, где
specialized.
в
They
восприятии уже три линзы,
conditioned from the point
они
of view
обуславливают
of this
движение
identified control
информации
system,
от одной
where there are
линзы,
three lenses in
которая
perception.
находится против
They
часовой стрелки
condition the
первой
movement of
от маленькой
information
линзы.
from one lens, which is the
И
first one located
видно, что от этой
counterclockwise from the small
второй по
lens.
счету линзы к
And
третьей
it can be
большой
seen
линзе
that from this
начинается
one,
движение
the second
информации.
one in a row,
И вот
the
здесь важно
movement of
отметить,
information
что Бог
begins to the
именно так
third
Он
large
создавал мир,
lens.
когда
And here it
развитие
is important
информации
to note
происходит
that
от
this is how God was
Его
creating the
внутренней
world,
идеи реализации
when the
всем вечной
development of
жизни,
information
когда
comes from His
работает
inner
первая
idea,
фиксированная
that
идеология
is their
управления.
realization
И
of eternal
когда
life for
мы
everyone. When
концентрируемся
the
в
first
коллективном
fixed
сознании
ideology of control
в этом
works, And when we
направлении, то,
concentrate in the collective
соответственно, мы
consciousness in this
получаем
direction, then
очень
accordingly we
емкую
get a
систему
very
знаний,
capacious system
которая
of knowledge,
постоянно
which constantly
развивает
develops
управление.
control.
И то, что я сказал
And
в
what I said at
начале
the beginning of
вебинара
today's
сегодняшнего,
webinar,
что нужно
that exactly this kind of
именно такое
information
развитие
development is
информации
needed in the
в
next level of
следующем уровне
action
действия,
when the
когда
reverse level of interaction is
обратный
eternal
уровень
life for everyone,
взаимодействия это есть вечная жизнь
including, of
для
course,
всех,
for the
и
one who
включая, естественно, для
exercises the
того,
control.
кто производит
It
управление,
is precisely
то
this
как раз-таки
technological
вот
effectiveness
эта
of the action,
технологичность действий, в
including
том
the
числе
use of
использование
instrumental systems,
приборных систем,
which
она
makes it
позволяет
possible to implement
реализовывать
this
это
quickly
достаточно
enough
быстро в необходимое
at the
время
necessary
для того,
time
чтобы все вечную жизнь
in order
достичь.
to
То
ensure
есть ускорение управления,
eternal life
например,
for all.
числовыми
That
рядами
is,
с
the
использованием
acceleration of control, for
PRK-1U
example,
еще
with
нужно
numerical
также для того,
series using
чтобы
the PRK-1U is still
ускориться в
needed in order to
необходимом случае
accelerate, if
настолько,
necessary,
чтобы
so much as you really
реально
provide
обеспечить всем
everyone with eternal
вечную
life
жизнь при
with
любом
any
сочетании
combination
событий.
of events.
То есть ускорение в
That
данном
is,
случае
acceleration
рассматривается
in
как
this case
необходимая
is
величина.
considered as a necessary
И
value.
если рассматривать,
And
как
if we
Бог создавал
consider
мир, ясно,
how
что
God created the
когда-то
world, it is
приходилось
clear that
какие-то
once
процессы
it was
ускорять,
necessary to accelerate,
усиливать и
strengthen and
производить
carry
управление
out
таким
control
образом,
of some processes
чтобы
in such a
ускорение
way
было
that the
достаточным для
acceleration was
обеспечения
sufficient to
вечного
ensure
мира,
eternal world,
включая
including initially, so that the
изначально,
eternal body of God
чтобы
would
вечное
exist
тело Бога
eternally in the
существовало
structure
вечно
of
в
the
структуре
controlling information.
управляющей информации.
And here, in this
И
regard,
здесь
it is
в связи с
possible to
этим
fully realize
можно
such control
вполне реализовать
when the transition of all
такое
external
управление, когда
information
переход
through the
от всей
system of
внешней
three
информации
lenses
через
into the
систему трех
structure of
лиц
perception,
в структуру
where the transition
восприятия,
is already made
где
to
уже
the
переход
physical
происходит
body
на
and to the
физическое
entire
тело и на
external
весь
world,
внешний мир в том
for
числе,
ensuring eternal
по
life,
обеспечению
all
всем
is
вечной
well.
жизни. Вот
This
этот
very
переход,
transition
он
is
таким
realized
образом
in such a way that
реализуется,
all
что
external
вся
information,
внешняя
in
информация,
essence, we can
она по
say as if
сути, можно
participates,
сказать, как бы
but in
участвует,
essence
но
it
по
really
существу она действительно
participates in the
участвует
structure
в структуре
of the
первичного уровня
primary
развития
level of
информации, и
information
получается
development.
непрерывное,
And thus
детерминированное,
we
то есть
get a continuous
причинно-следственный след
deterministic, that is
развития
a
любой
cause and
информации
effect trace of the
как в
development of
бесконечное
any
прошлое, так и в
information
бесконечное будущее.
both into the
И
infinite
вот
past and
выделение в
into the
каждом, так
infinite
скажем,
future.
зерне
And
информации
so the allocation, so
вот
to
этой
speak,
линии
in each grain of
позволяет
information of this line
широко
makes it possible to
распространить эту
disseminate
информацию
widely
как в
this
области возле
information,
себя.
both to the area near
Любая
yourself.
область начинает
Any
иметь
area begins to have
обволакивающие ее
an
преды, так и в
enveloping
области
pre-area, and to an
абсолютно
area that
удаленной
is
на
absolutely remote for such a
такое
distance,
выдаление,
which,
которое,
for example,
например, не
cannot be counted in
исчисляется
measuring
в
instruments.
средствах
That is a
измерения.
certain
То есть
divine
определенный
level where
божественный
God
уровень, где Бог
contacts the
контактирует
entire reality of the world,
с
where
всей
all
реальностью мира,
concepts and all
где
structures
заложены
are
все
laid,
понятия и все структуры,
and
и
then
когда эта
contact
контактность происходит
occurs
именно на
precisely at the
божественном
divine
уровне, и
level,
вот эта
and this
информация
information
начинает
begins to
иметь
have an all-encompassing phase of control.
всеобъемлющую
As
фазу
soon as we
управления.
come to this
Вот как только
information
мы
in
к
the
этой
part
информации подходим,
where the
к той
control
части,
area
где из
moves from the second
второй
large
большой
lens to the
линии
third
к
one,
третьей перемещается
we can see that the interaction of
управляющая ось, то
numbers,
мы можем рассмотреть,
for
что
example, on
взаимодействие
these
чисел,
lenses or near
например,
these
на этих
lenses,
линзах
can
или
be
возле этих линз,
accelerated in the
оно
control area,
может быть
where,
ускорено в
first of
управляющей
all, it
области,
is the
где в
implementation of
первую
events
очередь
to ensure
реализуется
eternal life
именно
for all that is
реализация
being
событий по
realized.
обеспечению всем вечной жизни. И это ускорение, оно
And this
выглядит
acceleration
следующим
looks like
образом,
this
если
if we consider the
в
process
цифровом
itself
варианте
in a
рассмотреть
digital version.
сам процесс.
For example,
Например,
considering the simplest
рассматривая там,
numerical series,
простейший там, числовой ряд,
if
если
we
от маленькой
consider
линзы
the
это,
action of the number 1
рассматривать
from
как
the
если
small
числа
lens,
1 слева, если
if there is lens 3 on the left
будет
and
находиться
on the right, this is the
линза
second
3, а
lens
справа это вот,
clockwise.
которая вторая линза
And then it turns
по
out,
часовой стрелке.
if we
И
consider
тогда
the impulse,
получается,
for
если
example,
рассмотреть импульс,
1 and
например,
3, then
1
it is clear that
и 3,
2
то
has
видно,
certain
что
qualities
2
of such a
имеет
stable
определенные качества
fixation for eternal life,
такой
because it is
стабильной фиксации
between the
на вечное
numbers
время,
1 and
потому что
3.
находится между числами
That is, two
1 и
numbers
3. То есть
surrounding
два
any number
числа,
give this number
окружающие
near which they are
какое-либо
located,
число,
namely
дают
this level of
этому
fixation.
числу, значит, возле которого они находятся,
That is, through this
именно вот
number
этот уровень
2,
фиксации.
one
То
can
есть через это
perceive
число 2
precisely
можно
the stream
воспринимать
of eternal
именно
life,
поток вечной
which
жизни,
actually
который
fills up the body very
наполняет тело
quickly.
практически
But here it is
очень
important to
быстро.
note that
Но
the
здесь
filling
важно
up
отметить, что
occurs precisely in
наполнение
time.
происходит
That is, you
именно
can
по
feel
времени.
it, you can
То есть это
actually feel it.
ощущается. Вот можно
We can
проделать сейчас
now
такое
do such a control in
управление
perception.
восприятия, и
It is
видно,
clear
что
that
от
from the
промежуточных
intermediate
чисел,
numbers,
в данном случае мы рассмотрели
in this
конкретно
case we
взять
examined
лучше число 2 и
specifically,
видеть,
it is better to
как
take the number
происходит это
2 and
управление.
see
И
how this
когда мы
control takes place.
рассматриваем вот
And
именно
when we consider
уровень
exactly the
божественного
level of
действия, где,
divine
собственно,
action,
подключает сам Бог,
where in
Создатель всего
fact
мира,
God,
для того,
the
чтобы
creator of
нам
the whole
помочь и
world,
реализовать
connects
всем
in order to help
структуру
us and to
управления
implement the structure of
таким
control for
образом, чтобы
all in
все
such a
тела
way that
стали,
all bodies
например,
become, for example,
мгновенно вечными
instantly
с точки
eternal
зрения
from the
коллективного
point of view
сознания,
of
потом
collective
это распространить
consciousness.
на
Then, to
физическую
extend
реальность,
this to
нужно
physical
посмотреть,
reality, we
как
should
Бог
see how
реализовывал
God
переход уже
realizes the
следственного
transition
импульса, то
from the
есть из,
effect
например,
impulse.
рассматривая в прикладном таком
That is,
смысле
for example, considering, in a
именно
sense, just
восприятие
from
линзу 3
perception lens 3
в
in the vector
векторе,
when
когда движется
information moves
информация
to
в линзе
lens
1,
1.
нужно так
It is
сопоставить этот
necessary to
процесс,
compare this
то
process in
видно, что
such a way
следственный уровень
that it is
действия,
clear that the
который переходит
effect level of action,
из
which
третьей
passes
линзы
from the third
в
lens to
первую,
the first one,
реализует,
implements in fact
по
a
сути,
decrease
уменьшение
by 2 iterations.
на 2
That is,
итерации, потому что
subtract 2
то
from
есть
3
3
and get the
отнимаем 2, мы
first
получаем первую
lens.
линзу. И
And
тогда
then it turns
получается,
out that
что
if any action,
любое
for
действие,
example,
если,
is divided into
например,
two intervals,
разбить на
due to the
2
fact that the
интервала,
action in fact
то
is
за счет того, что
continuous
действие, по
according to
сути,
the
одна
objective control
непрекращающаяся по
function.
целевой функции
But when it
управления,
is divided into
но
two
когда
intervals,
оно
it turns out that
разбито
it
на 2
is
интервала,
mental.
то получается, что вот это
That is
мысленное, то есть
volitional
волевое
separation.
разделение, это
This is
есть
interference
вмешательство в
in
какой-то
some kind of
непрерывный
continuous
процесс,
process.
не в том плане,
Well,
что
not in the
каким-то
sense
образом это
that this
вмешивание
interference
влияет, а мы
somehow
чисто
influences,
умозрительно
but we
вмешиваемся,
interfere
считая, что
purely
действие разделено на 2 части.
speculatively,
И от
believing
этого
that the action
получаем
is divided into two
сопоставимость
parts.
действием объем
And due
информации.
to this,
То
we
есть ведь,
obtain the
чтобы Бог
comparability
создал
of the
мир,
action on the amount of
которого, например,
information.
до
That is,
действия
in
Бога,
order
до
for
начала
God to
создания
create
Бога
the
мира
world, which, for
не было,
example,
то он должен
before
же
the action
был,
of God, before the beginning
естественно,
of God's creation of
таким
the world
образом
did not
модулировать
exist,
систему
He
управления
would naturally
по
have to regulate
возникновению
the
именно
control
какой-то
system
материи,
for the
в том числе
emergence of
физической,
such
чтобы
matter,
заменять
including
физические
physical
процессы
one, in order to replace
какими-то
physical
модельными
processes
системами, то
with
есть которые
some kind
происходили
of
в
modal
восприятии Бога.
systems, that is,
Тогда
which took
получается,
place in perception of
что
God.
и мир будет тогда
Then it turns
абсолютно
out that the
разнообразным
world
и
will
вечно
then be
развиваться, так
absolutely
как ни
diverse and
одна
develop
конструкция жестко
eternally,
не базируется
since
на
no
другой.
one structure is
И,
rigidly based on
кстати
another.
говоря, эта
And by the
система,
way,
она
this system is very
очень
efficient,
эффективно,
this
вот эта
system of
система познания,
cognition, in antiviral protection
противовирусной
against any
защите
type
от
of
любого типа
virus
вируса, который
that is
вреден для
harmful to
организма
the human
человека,
body or generally
или вообще,
speaking to any
говоря, вообще
living
любого живого
being in
существа.
general.
Здесь вот
Here, it
именно
is
опора
precisely
на
the reliance on the
динамику
dynamics of
управления,
control
когда
when the next
следующий
element
элемент
can be
может быть
modulated and
смодулирован и
introduced as a
введен как
counter
контуруправление,
control, creates
создает
protection. In
защиту, по
fact,
сути,
from
от
any
любого
virological
бактериологического и, вообще
and
говоря,
generally
любого
speaking, any
такого
such
внешнего,
external,
в том числе
including
бактериологического такого
bacteriological
воздействия,
influence,
когда
when it is necessary to
необходимо
build a structure of
строить
protection
структуру
of control
защиты
due to
управления
mobile
за счет
systems of
подвижных
thinking.
систем мышления.
And here, in the
И
numerical version of
здесь, в
control,
числовом
it is possible
варианте
to
управления,
arrange the control elements so
можно
that the
так
control
расположить
structure
управляющие элементы, чтобы
itself uses
сама
a
структура
real physical
управления использовала
device.
еще реальный
That
физический
is, by
прибор. То
displaying
есть,
the system of
выводя
perception or
систему
physically
восприятия
looking at the
или
device,
физически, смотря
either
на
through some
приборы или
kind of a
через там,
smartphone or,
какой-то
for example, or
телефон,
any
например,
gadget,
гаджет любой, рассматривая
viewing
через
through online broadcasting, we
онлайн-трансляцию,
can combine the control
мы
that took
можем
place in the field of
объединить
thinking,
управление, которое
in the field
происходило
of
в
development of
области
consciousness,
мышления,
a
в
simultaneous
области развития
image in
сознания,
this case,
одновременно область в данном
and
случае.
looking, for
И
example, with physical vision, or even imagining the area where, for example, a physical device is located. And here you can see that as soon as we start to work in this way, then on the body of the device, which is interesting to observe, this is the system forming level in perception. It repeats constantly, does not change over time. It appears where the corner elements of the body, concentration in the form of wide areas of light, and this radiation is necessarily mobile. It is important to know that this mobility is indirectly connected with the inner lens of the device and with an element, a composition that organizes and configures special electromagnetic fields due to electrical energy. And when we, for example, turn off the action of electrical energy by a mental action, that is, by introducing an impulse directly into the device, we see that the optics works identically, but its impulses are just prolongated. That is, if, for example, the device is turned off, then the optics are so placed, from the electric power supply, the optics are so placed that they work by themselves too. Well, it is one of the properties of technology, providing precisely the technologies that implement and ensure eternal life. And therefore, in this case, it must be borne in mind that work for acceleration, including with the work with numerical series, when using the PRK-1U device, can be carried out in such a way that the optics area can be considered separately, and the area where optics interacts with the electromagnetic component can be considered as a separate level of work. And if the electromagnetic control structure, electromagnetic fields, are considered in an adaptive version, as what we have been doing during this webinar, that is the level where we mentally place the lenses, namely the static area should be considered as lenses rigidly located in the physical device. We will get a configured control structure that can be imposed on numerical series, and at the same time, technologically, so to speak, in a simplified form, which does not remove precisely the quality of control. It looks just as follows, that this is an identical control, and the number series is considered both inside the device, and it can be viewed on a large lens and on some of the lenses as well. And it is better to mentally place the number series near the small lens first, then move it counterclockwise to the large lens, and further to the second lens. There will be the second lens. And further from the third lens, move it again counterclockwise towards the small lens. It should be noted here that the movement from the second lens to the third one occurs as if by itself. You can even observe it, that an element of this number series begins to appear there. And then, in order to strengthen the control of the number series by using the device, you can concentrate in addition to this action on the numbers that are on the surface of the device in the form of a plate, as follows. First, concentrate on the number along with those numbers that are next to this number, which means on the left and on the right. And then you look at the controls in such a way that first you can do the following. Look at the right and left, or just concentrate on the left number first. That is, this is an individual approach. You can develop this concentration. Well, in fact, in this case, the technology consists of using these two control structures. When the numerical series are considered both inside the device and near the lenses. And when you consider the control in such a way that you use specific numbers that are on the surface of the device, the amplification occurs, generally speaking, also because in fact the device itself keeps working, where the amplification takes place directly by the action of the device. This level of control is embedded in the structure of the device, and therefore now those devices that are being implemented in the direction of normalizing health are now undergoing clinical trials. And good results in clinical trials show that here it is possible to implement the device when it works. In fact, independently in those cases when, for example, the patient does not work actively or does not work with the device due to his condition. Therefore, since the task is to normalize a person in any conditions, the first control is triggered into an element of the past in order to correct what is not necessary for this state to be allowed in the past. Next, the control is triggered to the current time, and the future is immediately realized. That is complete normalization in the direction of ensuring eternal life for everyone, when in fact not only normalization of health, but normalization with a certain redundancy of information, so that the norm of health as much has been implemented and as much reserved functions appear that a person concretely lives eternally. And it turns out that this is the direction with the transfer of knowledge. It sometimes has a significant importance during the rehabilitation period. And therefore, it is in fact the device for the development of the concentration of eternal life PRK-1U is immediately implemented as an educational technology combined with a training system program, and it can do a separate control for normalization exactly of those diagnoses where the tests have been passed, separately for those devices that have passed clinical trials. And it turns out that the combination of educational technology, when a person can implement independently through education, for example, according to the training program on my teachings. Here I just show that the combination of technology, that is the technical part of the implementation of control with, for example, the development of thinking, spirit, consciousness and actions of the soul. Here you can see that the development of the soul determines, among other things, the development of both consciousness and spirit, and the necessary development to ensure all the eternal life of future events. Since the soul is eternal, it is clear that this development is constantly being realized in the structure of the eternal world. And here, when we look at the question of how God acted to create the eternal world, since his soul is also originally eternal, it is clear that the self-organization of the soul of God is a process that differs from the fact that he was creating an eternal physical body. And when we consider, I mean in this case precisely our physical body, but that according to a mechanism like this, all people can receive it. And when we consider these processes, the interconnection of the creation of the soul and the physical body simultaneously with God, the process of simultaneity can be realized here as well, when we work on the construction with number series. That is, considering, for example, some numerical series by choosing a certain series. For example, you can choose a series to ensure eternal life for all in the reality of dynamic magnetic control. Such a series will be 4, 9, 8, 1. And when we look further, as soon as we start working with this series, it is clear that in order to ensure eternal life for everyone, it is advisable to add another series, because the more series we add in this direction, which namely functionally precisely provide control, the better it is, because the interaction of the two series gives the next level of control, but in the same direction. And here's the next series: 5, 4, 9, 1, 7, 4, 8. It also realizes the provision of eternal life to all, realizes the events in such a way. And in this case, in the first series, for example, the use of the number 4, and in the second one, the number 5, forms a kind of bundle, that is the beginning of the series, where all control systems are implemented in the global sense as well, which provide everyone with eternal life, and they realize the events so that we see the structure of control both in the distance, eternally, and specifically in the moment where we are. There is some kind of attraction, some kind of magnetic component is organized in perception, that all are eternal, just as, for example, the magnetic field is stably eternal. Then it turns out that this very statics, which in perception from the point of view of the magnetic field is reflected in the control, in the device itself, this is PRK-1U, the electromagnetic component also characterizes the movement of the magnetic field into the structure of the electromagnetic impulse, and therefore in the three-mode device for the development of the concentration of eternal life, PRK-1U, there is a level of work of artificial intelligence, where it is necessary to modify, for example, the magnetic level of the magnetic field. It is modified due to the electric field. And when we consider the combination, when due to the movement of electrons, respectively electromagnetic structures arise, a structure arises that can, for example, independently on its own, with, for example, more intensive operation of the device, switch from the third mode to the second one. And after some time, it can turn on the third one again. And this is just the same work within the framework of the very concept that I am now reporting. I tell that it is imperatively necessary to combine the static structures of physical reality with the structures of informational reality. For instance, as has already been done with three lenses in perception, so that any element of reality worked only for one task, and how it realized it in this case. This is ensuring eternal life for all. Thus, we get a calm, systematic, beneficial work for everyone, which realizes eternal life for any combination of reality. It does not matter whether it is information from the point of view of thinking, or information from the point of view of information, for example, on the internet, or information from the point of view of material systems that relate to physical matter of the world. And here we just come to the main level of control, which in today's webinar is when information comes to you from any source of information that provides you and everyone with eternal life. Here, just the same, it is required to unite all the spectra of reality instantly, very quickly. And in this unification, that is, in superfast action, we find ourselves on the divine level of the reality of the world. And there, naturally, is eternal life for everyone. And then it turns out that from that point of view, for example, of working on the PRK-1U device, it is just necessary to combine with a sharp mental action the light that is emitted from the three lenses somewhere approximately in the geometric center between the lenses. And in this case, we see that a bright ray arises in the perception of light, which begins to move upward, and it arises in such a special way that is, in order to detect it, for example, you need to take a special look. Well, for those who are just starting to develop control clairvoyance or control forecasting, this technology is needed, is necessary. And those who have already mastered it, they will see right away. So for a beginner's level of control, it can be seen here that the beam from the device rises almost instantly upward, and the perception comes from it as from an infinite value. This is a special level of perception. It is understandable for many, but generally speaking, in fact, everyone understands from birth, having been born, a person perceives infinity. This is the same thing, that is, there is nothing new. As it were, initially you just need to tune into it. And when this control beam is implemented, it should be noted for those who are just starting to do this in order to see it, that the beam, in fact, does not come from the inner part of device, but it for some micrometers does not touch the upper surface of the physical device. And in order for the beam to connect to the device and give the same type of information, both the physical device and the device that is perceived, is necessary to force this ray by an effort of will, in fact, just like mentally pushing it so that it touches the physical surface of the device. Then we will see that the same ray will appear where we perceived three lenses, and gradually in this perception the image of the device begins to form. And it is evident that it is formed exactly. This is, by the way, a new way I am now just giving, how to create the structure of that technique that realizes eternal life in the future. That is, proceeding from those principles and methods, from understanding what I said, it is clear that this technique can be considered in the future. Then it is possible to transfer it to the structure of perception and just create it. That is, the very process of creating such a technique does not necessarily look like, for example, certain creative levels of perception, which of course is also permissible and often very necessary when there is, for example, scientific insight. But in this case, I am talking about a systematic approach to eternal life, when it is required to introduce special technologies to building technology. Well, since they sound like as if they are coming from the future, but often this is the information of such future technical systems. The material area in which is separated in the information itself, and then it is projected onto the area of perception from the point of view of study. That is, God creating himself to be eternal everywhere. Well, in this case, I'm not talking specifically from the point of view of technology, but I'm talking about, in this case, why did God create such a world of exactly a realized technical system that is implemented by man? That is, after all, for example, with super developed capabilities, a person can concretely realize eternal life. But in this case, what is important? The technical systems make it possible to understand deeper the mechanism for realizing eternal life for everyone. Due to the fact that we can design these systems, logical imagination develops, and we work out the structures of eternal life for any cellular, atomic level of any living being in control, and technically it is possible to pull something up somewhere to strengthen, and then due to the training, the advanced students, according to my teachings, they can and do already, very many of them, this number of such students very quickly increases directly many times, by the way, so to speak. And here it turns out that yes, individual capabilities are high and often realize all the control ranges due to creative control, self-development, for example, mental activity in the right direction. That is, a person can be very developed in certain directions, in certain areas, and in others he can thus develop as he wants to any level. Well, let's say of the mind, which is required to achieve a certain level of control. And this is where the level of understanding arises, that when God laid the world, he generally inserted what, for example, into the level of mental activity and of the mind that realizes everything. It is clear here that for any combination of events, God had to control everything, having created. Is it possible to include such a concept as a super intelligent God? And it is clear that he is smarter than everyone else, he is super intelligent. You can say any appropriate definitions after all, as soon as we understand, and this is absolutely obvious, that God also created everything. It means that he also created the characteristics of the mind for himself. What is called the mind? And then it turns out he is even smarter, right? That is, he then it arises here at the level of such mental development how many more qualities he must have in order to create the necessary level of mind, perception of everything, generally speaking, which is in applied sense is considered as a certain primary given. So going beyond the level of this control from the point of view of a certain special action where professional knowledge is required, it is clear that where professional knowledge is required in one's profession, there, of course, it is necessary, of course, to comprehend often a lot of textual knowledge in the form of images. It is necessary to have a practical experience, and this is a certain direction. In this case, I'm talking about the formation of the required level of personality development, including the quality of the development of consciousness, the development, so to speak, of creative personal abilities, the use of the structure of your mind in a certain direction. And here again, such a moment arises in perception in control that when a person uses number series, there seem to be some short periods in information control. The series works because it is built this way. Due to my many times tested abilities in the diagnostics of aviation equipment, when the exact 100% confirmation for the entire series of diagnostics was confirmed, specific mechanisms were developed. I created these numerical series, used certain structures and methods such as archiving information at any point in space-time methods. And then it turns out that, in fact, the very method of archiving or archiving information at any point in space-time determines, it is clear in the very name of it, that if at any point in space time information can be developed so much, it will become controlling. And when we bind a specific target series there, it implements from this area local action on the task, which applies to all structures of the world. And in order to amplify this with the device, you can simply imagine in your mind that the device is working here. But here, in addition, it is necessary to understand that the very short action by a number series implies an understanding, generally speaking, of the entire structure of the world. And this understanding immediately comes as soon as a person realizes that the control takes place with a mandatory preliminary action, when the action first extends to providing everyone with eternal life. And he, applying the number series from my teachings, already exercises very global control. Because in fact in each series this element is essentially just a certain level of the essence of control. And now, for example, if you think about why God created the world in such a way that people came to the number, that is in the end, for example, in the iterative model of the world, he also created numbers. Then it turns out that the numbers exist from the point of view of God. They should show the essence of the world, since the essence of the world should be reflected in each impulse. And as soon as we see the essence of the world reflected in each number, then we can accordingly understand that the reverse level, the vector that reflects back the structure of the whole world, has exactly this factor and a real action to provide everyone with eternal life. That is, we, in fact, in this case, use the number as a structure that implements the contact level of access and the reverse divine impulse, where everything is clear, everything is understandable, and at the same time, eternal life is provided even by contact with God. And then human turns to be beyond the number. He controls this number. He realizes his control structures through it. But since he is eternal and his life is infinite, then accordingly it is no longer defined by some numbers or, for example, structures which can somehow influence him. It is important to understand in this case that the control of numbers can and should take place, as it were, outside the system of binding a number to a person. And then it is clear that he is absolutely free, independent of some numbers. He simply uses them. They, yes, according to my teachings, are precisely the numbers that I have outlined due to the controlling clairvoyance and the controlling forecasting. They exist in the structure of the world precisely as controlling to ensure eternal life for all. And the essence of this number, put forward into the structure of divine action, even with a simple reading, realizes this very system of realization to ensure eternal life for everyone. Therefore, when we begin to completely add up all the control systems in our perception, including those that are shorter, there, and so on, which are in the form of numbers, some longer control methods, some are connected with understanding, then it is clear that the main level of control is the quality of knowledge of the one who is doing control for ensuring eternal life for all. And at the same time, it is clear that the one who controls, he uses any information as a means of control that ensures eternal life for all. That is, in the very essence of control, when we accelerate the control with numerical series by means of the PRK-1U device, where concentration is realized to ensure eternal life for everyone, that is, it is precisely the event that ensures eternal life that is provided, then it is clear that the control system itself works both as a single level of interaction and a single level of action. It is a certain definite divine level where, among other things, this creation of numbers is considered at the divine level, and, by the way, there is, among other things, complete independence from the number. That is, the use of number series, on the contrary, does not make a person dependent, but on the contrary makes a person independent. He controls this number. He, the person, moves it forward in the space of thinking. After all, my technologies are based on realizing it in the space of thinking. The number is not attached to anything. And therefore, we can very confidently say that these technologies of using control with numerical series and the use of other methods of control according to my teachings, they enhanced when using the device for the development of concentrations PRK-1U. They first of all give the action that is organically connected with the divine level of realization of each personality, and they necessarily give this one which must be past the level in order to control. namely the level of ensuring eternal life for all in reality, in physical reality. And therefore such control, where there is acceleration, any level of acceleration, is absolutely necessary to be implemented exactly where it is needed. That is, everyone can feel it, understand it, or even logically some kind of control elements appear for him when it must be done. So in fact, the very acceleration at the required level is also a system for ensuring eternal life for everyone. And as I said today, acceleration itself can be used to realize eternal life for everyone. This concludes the webinar today. Thank you all for your attention. I wish everyone a harmonious eternal life.
гармоничной вечной жизни.